Hey, what's going on YouTube? Hyperdark19 here, bringing you the first in what I hope will be the long-running series, Breaking the Meta. The reason I like to call it Breaking the Meta is because, number one, I will be presenting deck profiles for you to take a look at and hopefully enjoy that to some extent counter a lot of the current meta decks out there and can be pretty competitive. And also, number two, like I said, they're going to be kind of offbeat and creative decks, I think in my opinion at least, that can also be built on a relative budget. So here's my first one, in case you hadn't looked at the title. It's Gravekeepers, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, first of all, I am talking about Gravekeepers here. I know a lot of you are going to yell at me and say, hey, HyperDark19, you said you were going to do creative decks and offbeat decks. Gravekeepers is a meta deck. Why are you doing this? But yeah, I think Gravekeepers, while it is a meta deck and a lot of people do play it, I think there's a lot of room to be creative with the deck and a lot of personal touches that you can put on it. So without further ado, I'm going to go through my Gravekeeper deck and review what I think are some good tech choices, as well as some cards that a lot of people play that I personally don't, and I'll explain those choices too. So without further ado, let's get right to it. First of all, monster lineup, 3 Gravekeeper Spies. It's Spy. What can you really say about it? Flip, you get to special summon pretty much any Gravekeeper monster from your deck to the field, and that's really, really broken. Not really much you can say about this card. Also, it has 2,500 defense as long as Necro Valley's on the field, which means anything, even Stardust, can't get over this thing. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, high defense monsters are really underrated, so Spy is definitely solid in almost every way. Next, we have 3 Gravekeepers Recruiters. This guy and Spy are pretty much the engine that make the whole deck go around. And this guy, whenever he's, in case you don't know what it does, whenever it's destroyed while on the field and sent to the graveyard, you can add a Gravekeeper from your deck to your hand with 1,500 defense or less, which pretty much means any Gravekeeper in the deck besides Spy. I mean, of course, it can't search Spy. I mean, how broken would that be? But, yeah, Recruiter and Spy together are definitely what make the deck work. And before Recruiter came out, Gravekeeper decks were really not even close to being as good as they are now. So Recruiter is definitely a must at 3. Next, another 3er, we got 3 Gravekeeper's Descendants. This guy is one of the MVPs of the deck, in my opinion, besides the first 2, in that he's got 2,000 attack with Necro Valley, which makes him a pretty decent beat stick, and also you contribute a Gravekeeper monster once per turn. Actually, not once per turn, I'm sorry. You contribute a Gravekeeper monster other than him, as many times as you want in a turn, to destroy one of your opponent's cards. That is an extremely powerful 1-for-1 effect that you have there. And this deck is pretty much goes around on 1-for-1s, much like the gadget decks of old. So yeah, this deck is based around 1-for-1s, and Descendant is definitely a key monster. Gives you a ton of advantage. So he's definitely a must at 3 as well. Also at 3, Gravekeeper's Commandant. This guy's kind of weird in that all the Gravekeeper monsters except him are dark. This guy's Earth, in case you couldn't tell. Here, take a look. And yeah, you discard him to search out the Necro Valleys. This is definitely needed at 3 because, like I said, searches a Necro Valley. Necro Valley's the key card in this deck. So it's definitely a great card to have. It's also the most powerful non-tribute monster in this deck. With Necro Valley, it gets boosted to 2,100 attack points, which is pretty decent. So, yeah, even if you're not discarding it, you can definitely play it on the field, and it won't be a big loss to you. So, definitely run these guys. Next, we have finally, 2 Gravekeeper's Assailants. This guy, there's not a whole lot of point to having him in the deck, to be honest. I mean, a lot of people do use him, but mostly the reason I use him is because, 1, he's a decent beat stick with 2,000 attack, as long as you have Necro Valley. He's dark, which you'll see is a bonus later on. And also, he has the kind of cool ability to change the battle position of a monster that he chooses to attack, which you can destroy anything pretty much as long as it has less than 2,000 defense. So, could be pretty good. I mean, doesn't get around Stardust, because Stardust unfortunately has 2,000 defense. But yeah, this deck really, really hates Stardust. because of all the 1-for-1 destruction, like I said. But I'll show you, I have outs for that later on. So yeah, Assailant is a good choice. Alright, now on to the tech monster choices that I have for this. These are kind of the offbeat choices that a lot of people don't play. 1, Gravekeeper's Chief. Chief is a card that I really haven't seen play except in my deck, and I just think it's so underrated for the Gravekeeper archetype, and it's really, really good. First of all, because while it does require a tribute to play, with Necro Valley, it's 2400 attack, making it by far the strongest monster in your deck. So it's a really pretty good beat stick. Also, when it's tribute summoned, you can special summon a Gravekeeper monster from your graveyard. So, I mean, just think about the possible plays you could have with this. You have Recruiter on the field. You say, oh, well, I tribute Recruiter to summon this guy, and search something with Recruiter, then bring the Recruiter back with his effect. If you have a Descendant, you can pop it off, search again, destroy a monster. I mean, there's just some insane combos with this guy, but I don't play it at more than 1 because of his little catch effect that says you can't have more than 1 Chief on the field at a time. So, I mean, I think 2 or 3 would be just a waste of deck space. So, Chief is definitely an underrated card in my opinion, and a really great card to play in this deck. And then lastly, in my monsters, tech choice, I have 2 Spirit Reapers. Yeah, I know they're proxies. Like I said, I'm in college, deal with it. I own them, but they're just not with me right now. Spirit Reaper is actually a wonderful card in this deck, I think, because it's dark, and I'll tell you that matters later on. It's another dark monster, two more dark monsters, actually. And the ability to that has it not be destroyed by battle ever is actually really, really good in this deck, because it allows you to stall until it allows you some measure of stalling if you need it, until you get your key combo plays, or if you have a crappy starting hand, you can defend with this guy all day, sit behind him. But also, seeing as there's a lot of 1-for-1 removal in this deck, and your opponent's field more often than not is going to be clear, leaving this guy in attack mode isn't a big deal. And the reason you want to attack with this guy when you can is because whenever he hits your opponent for damage, they have to discard a random card from their hand. Hand control is a very underrated strategy in my opinion, and Spirit Reaper gives that to this deck, and more often than not you are going to be attacking directly, so he's a pretty good card to have, I think. Great piece of tech for this deck. Alright, now on to the spell cards. I'm going to just go quickly through what I think are the staple cards of any deck. Dark Hole, duh, it's Dark Hole, you know, same old story. Giant Trunade, it's Trunade. It clears the field for your big plays. We'll get rid of Necro Valley, but you can just play it back down anyway, so it's a very good card. And lastly, Book of Moon, because not only does it stop the synchro plays, like I said in my other episode, you can massively abuse this card with Spy, in that you flip Spy up, summon a monster, use Book to flip it face down, flip it up again, summon another monster. Yeah, you can do that. That is legal. So, yeah, Book of Moon definitely has a lot of abuse potential in this deck. Now, the one staple card that, well, actually, there's a couple staple cards that I didn't include. You'll notice I didn't include Mystical Space Typhoons in this deck because mostly of Descendant. I mean, this deck, and Giant Trunade, this deck has a lot of 1-for-1 removal already, so adding MSTs is kind of, I feel, it would be too much. So I really haven't needed MSTs in this deck. So, no MSTs. Also, no Monster Reborn, which is almost a staple in almost every deck, but this deck, it's a dead draw if you have Necro Valley on the field, so I don't play Monster Reborn. I have Chief for that. Well, this is a Gravekeeper deck, so it wouldn't be complete without 3 copies of the field spell, Necro Valley. Necro Valley is a fantastic card. It shuts down 90% of the meta decks out there because they all rely on graveyard tactics. And this card just shuts them down. Gives 500-point boost to your Gravekeepers as well, which is the most of any field spell as far as I'm aware. And there's a lot of complicated rulings on this card, but Stardust can get around it if it sacrifices itself. Things that special summon themselves from the graveyard can get around it, but a lot of things can't. So Necro Valley is wonderful. A lot of people also don't play this at 3. A lot of people play it at 2 because there is so much searching opportunities in this deck, but you will see later why I play 3 of these, mostly a consistency thing. So 3 Necro Valleys. Alright, next up we have 2 Gravekeepers, Steel, however you want to say it. Steel is a very good addition to the Gravekeeper arsenal because it just allows you to return two Gravekeepers from your graveyard to your hand, regardless of stats, and it's just such a good card. It's a salvage for Gravekeepers. If anyone plays salvage, you know how good that card is for water decks. So Gravekeeper Steel is a must at 2. I've tried playing it with 3, but the consistency issue comes up, so 2 is definitely a good number. I mean, bring it back your spies, bring back your recruiters, bring back your descendants, even your chief, bring it back for more abuse. It's just really fun times with this card. So, and this comes in really critical with the next card that I'm going to show you, which is 2 copies of Royal Tribute. This card is the crush card of the deck. It is the bomb card. Really, if you don't have this, I hate to say this, but a Gravekeeper deck really is not effective without Royal Tribute. Royal Tribute is such a good card. I can't even explain how good of a card this is. Well, if you don't know what it does, you play it, you can only play it when you have Necro Valley on the field, and both players have to discard all monster cards from their hand to the graveyard, and they each reveal their hands. So not only do you get to see what's in your opponent's hand, but you get to get rid of all the monsters in their hand, and especially if you play this first turn before your opponent has had a chance to play anything, this can just destroy a lot of decks, and like getting rid of 3 or 4 monsters especially, they're not going to come back from that easily because a lot of decks out there are not good at top decking, so they are not going to come back from that easily. Royal Tribute is just so good, and I think actually, I'm not playing 3 because the new ban list says you can only play 2. I think that playing it at 2 really increases its playability, actually, because having 3 and, drawing maybe 2 of them, there's not really a point to having more than 1 in your hand at the same time. So I like it at 2, personally. I think it's great for consistency. So yeah, 2 Royal Tributes. Lastly, for the spells, we have Allure of Darkness. Why? Because it's a draw card. And as you're about to see, I do not play Pot of Duality. I will go more into that later. Allure of Darkness. Almost all the monsters in this deck are dark, including the Spirit Reapers. You can remove them. And if you remove a Gravekeeper, you have like 3 of each of them anyway, so it doesn't make a big difference. This is the draw pout. This is like the only draw card that I have in here. I know, but I'll talk about more about that later. Yes, Allure is definitely a great card, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to speed this up a little bit. I'm going to have to split this up into 2 videos. I hate doing that, but alright. Staple Traps. 2 Bottomless Trap Hole, obviously. Great card. Stops a lot of monsters out there. Mirror Force, it's Mirror Force. Torrential, it's Torrential, protects your field, stops big plays. Solemn Judgment stops pretty much anything, and you can always have the life points to pay it, so great card right there. Now my tech choices. 3 D-Prisons. D-Prison stops the Stardust, stops a lot of things out there, so I think D-Prison is a really underrated card. I think it should see more play. D-Prison is just fantastic in my opinion, so 3 D-Prisons. Then 1 Royal Oppression, you can only play 1. Like I said before, this card is the bomb. I love this card. Stops a lot of decks out there cold, so Royal Oppression is a fantastic card. I mean, you do special summon a lot with your spies and stuff, but overall, it hurts your opponent more than it hurts you, so fantastic card to have in this deck. And lastly, in the trap lineup, 3 Compulsory Evacuation Device. I know, 1's a proxy, but deal with it. Compulse is a fantastic card for this deck, not because it's another out for the Stardust, and like I said, this deck hates Stardust Dragon, so you want to get it away as soon as humanly possible. Yeah, so this just bounces any card. Like I've said before, this is a great card for anti-meta choice. And alright, I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to mention before I go on to the next video explaining this, that this deck, actually, I took 2nd at my local tournament with this. I beat Dragunity, Fish OTK, and, what was the other deck? I forget right now, I'll get back to you on that, but I lost to Fableds, but that was a close game as well. But I'll talk to you more about that in my next video. That's my Gravekeeper deck profile, and in my next video I'll explain the combos of the deck, how it works, and how it combats meta decks. So that's my Gravekeeper deck profile, and alright, I'll be back with another video, so peace, YouTube.